All right, Rob, we were talking earlier about last night's 49ers demolition of the Jets. And we talked about the Jets defense that really struggled, particularly against the run. Jordan Mason, an undrafted player, running back, filling in for Christian McCaffrey and going for $147 is not what's supposed to happen to a Jets defense that had been touted as one of the best in the league. But also playing a big role in demolishing the Jets defense was Brock Purdy. 19 for 29 overall, 231 yards. It's not a spectacular statistical night, but if you watch the game, he just surgically kind of picked apart the Jets. He had 4 passes that were 20-plus air yards, completions, and 1 that was 30-plus air yards, and a touchdown dropped by his best receiver, Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk actually was very rusty, Rob, dropped two passes last night. He, of course, sat out pretty much the whole training camp.
Well, I mean, he's got work to catch up on, and those are balls, the touchdown he catches. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. And as much as, you know, you might say, oh, those hurts Purdy's numbers or whatever, Ayuk is, believe me, he is kicking himself, you know, because these guys, and I'm not not saying this in a negative way, they want to rack up numbers, Rob. They want to be all pro. You know, they want to, you know, do all these great things, get all these accolades. And that is a play that, you know, you won't get back. And if you get 10 touchdowns this year, you should have had 11. You get 6, you should have had 7, whatever it might be. So I'm sure that's eating him up, and he'll rectify that, I would imagine, and get back in the lab and be ready next week. Because he only dropped 2 balls all last season. And he dropped 2.
Is that what he had,
yesterday.
Chris? I didn't know that was the number.
That's what I read. That's what I read.
He dropped 2 balls? Wow.
Yeah. Ayuk is tough. I think he's their best receiver. Although I will say Debo showed the old Debo last night, Rob.
Yeah, because people were talking last year that he wasn't really a factor in the Super Bowl.
Been banged up a little bit. Yeah. And he played well. But here's what I want to get to, because, I mean, I like Brock Purdy. He's obviously been incredibly productive. I think you've given him his props too.
No, when he's done it, Chris, absolutely.
There's really nothing. Nobody's saying he's Mahomes or Joe Burrow or anything like that.
And he'll never be able to escape like his place. I believe this.
Meaning,
like people being indifferent about him until he wins the Super Bowl.
Oh, okay. I thought
until
you
he wins the Super Bowl.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Because that's where you are. Like the Brock Purdy era, Chris. If say they go, he plays well the next 2 or 3 years, and they don't win, and then have to undo the team, it'll be like he was Tony Romo. You know what I mean? Like
he's been better. I mean, he's done a lot more than Tony Romo.
I know, but people will never give him he needs to win a Super Bowl.
I agree that as long as he doesn't have the Super Bowl, and there obviously people have come around a lot. He was 4th in MVP voting. So, you know, he's getting respect in a lot of corners.
I agree with that.
But there are those doubters out there. You're right. And he won't get rid of all the doubters probably until he wins the Super Bowl. And one thing a lot of people say, and I think you've said it too, Rob, is that because Jimmy Garoppolo, who everybody acknowledges was not as good as Purdy, but, you know, he was able to go to San Francisco, turn them around, and obviously win a lot of games. But because he got the Niners to the Super Bowl as a good quarterback, but not a great quarterback,
right,
people are like, yeah, okay, Purdy's had a lot of success, but
this team already had success before he got there.
With or without him, they had success. See, and then look at the people around him.
And the flip is Joe Burrow, Chris, the reverse.
Right.
Joe Burrow. The Bengals couldn't win a playoff game, right?
Right.
They had good teams. They went 0-7, right, in the playoffs.
Right.
And then and then Joe Burrow shows up his second year after he played 6 or 7 games his rookie year, and they're in the Super Bowl.
Right.
And
Burrow, now, in fairness, Burrow did have a lot of weapons too. He didn't have a great franchise he was playing.
But that's what I'm saying is like the
But he had
franchise to
Jamar
that point,
Chase,
right.
he had T. Higgins, he had Tyler Boyd, he had Joe Mixon in the backfield. Like, he had a lot of weapons too. But I get what you're saying. But here's what I want to ask, Rob, and this is not meant to be a slight at all on Christian McCaffrey. He's great. I have no problem with people viewing him as the best running back in the league. You know, it depends on what you're looking for. It's obviously been Derrick Henry if you're just talking about straight running. But running and pass receiving, McCaffrey's been the best the last couple of years. But here's the thing, and obviously last night they didn't miss him. And an undrafted player runs for 147 yards. I'm just saying, like, the shadow that kind of hovers over Purdy because Jimmy Garoppolo got them to the Super Bowl, why doesn't that hover over McCaffrey? Because remember, they ran the ball really well without him. As soon as they got good, which was pretty much when Jimmy G got there, and Kyle Shanahan's calling the plays, and they run a lot of play action, and the run game is important in this offense. They've always run the ball well, even before Christian McCaffrey got there. Raheem Mostert.
I remember that.
Remember they literally ran to the Super Bowl.
They ran over Green Bay in that.
Absolutely. What did Jimmy G threw it 8 times?
Yeah, they
in
ran
a playoff
over them.
game.
Yep.
And in the Super Bowl, they were having their way against Kansas City, and then Shanahan wants to throw the football. We talked about him before with that, but Mostert 5.5 yards a carry the year they go to the Super Bowl. Matt Breida 5 yards a carry. They both combined for about 1,400 yards.
No, I get it, Chris.
Right? Elijah
Sabunia. Oh no.
Elijah Mitchell. Jeff Wilson. They've had good running backs. And Mostert goes to Miami last year and makes the Pro Bowl. So what I'm saying, Rob, is I get that McCaffrey was great in college. He was a high. I think he was a high draft. Yeah, he was great. Right. And he made a couple of all-pro teams with the Panthers. So he was already minted, so to speak.
Record. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was an 8th pick in the draft.
See, that's the difference between him and Purdy is that Purdy doesn't have anything prior, from before the 49ers to feel that way about him, whereas McCaffrey was like, no, before he got to the 49ers, the dude was balling out.
He just kept getting hurt. That was his main problem.
Yeah.
And I get that, and that's fair, but it does feel like it's more perception than maybe reality. Because I thought last night, and everybody talks about it's everybody but Purdy, right? It's Debo and Kittle and McCaffrey and Ayuk. And last night, I thought it looked like all those guys are still great. Don't get me wrong. But Purdy was the dude getting it done. And we've seen that in playoff games. I mean, he led them back against Green Bay and Detroit. So I just think you may be right. I mean, he's not going to get the full credit because he was Mr. Irrelevant until he wins the Super Bowl.
And it's Mr. Irrelevant and that the team had prior success.
Right.
It's not just Mr. Irrelevant because we talk about it all the time, Chris. Kurt Warner wasn't Mr. Irrelevant, but he was bagging groceries.
He was worse. He didn't even get drafted.
Exactly. He was bagging groceries and playing in the Arena Football League or something.
Yep.
Right? And this guy won the MVP and the Super Bowl MVP, right? He was unbelievable out of nowhere. So
and lifted that team, right?
Yeah.
I agree with all that.
Right.
And it is what it is. I can't say it's unfair. I mean, you got to give the dude props for the production he's had, but I get the perception. It's just, there's some guys that we were great in college, get drafted high. Like I always say it, Rob, if Purdy was drafted in the first round, heck, if he was drafted
in the third round,
right?
We wouldn't even be having a conversation.
Yeah, everybody'd already be thinking he's great.
Yep, I agree. I think that your draft position does have something to do with it, and we know that Joe Montana and Tom Brady weren't drafted high, Chris, or whatever.
Right, Brady 6th round, Montana.
But they came from storied schools. Yep. You know what I mean, and had a bit of a pedigree, even though they weren't
They did.
You know, and that's what Brady came from Michigan.
Right.
Joe Montana came from Notre Dame. Like, it's not like
Purdy's from Iowa
came
State.
from Southern Connecticut or something.
Technical agricultural.
Whatever. What you get?
All right.